Marieta Pehlivanova is a research assistant professor of psychiatry and neurobehavioral sciences at the University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies. Her background is in statistics and experimental psychology, and her main research interests are near-death experiences and the phenomenon of children who report memories of past lives, commonly known as reincarnation. Along with Jim Tucker, Bruce Grayson, and others, Marieta is the fifth member of the University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies that we've interviewed. You can find the others via the YouTube playlist link in the description. So, Marieta, to start us off, can you please tell me a little bit about your background and about what you do at the Division of Perceptual Studies?
Hi, Ben. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure.
So my educational background is in statistics originally. I have a bachelor's degree in statistics, and then I went on to get a PhD in experimental psychology. So I have, I guess, a diverse complementary background. So at the Division of Perceptual Study, I do research primarily on near-death experiences and children who report past life memories and a few other topics, but I spend less time on those, including after-death communications and dabbling a little bit into work on cognitive and personality correlates of paranormal belief.
Cool. Yeah. Really, really interesting stuff. I'm fascinated by so many of these areas. And you've been at DOPS for how, did you say 6 years now you've been at DOPS?
Yes, I've been at DOPS for 6 years.
Yeah. And you've been doing the same kind of things the whole time, like kind of working across these different departments?
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. So let's talk first of all, I guess, about near-death experiences, and then come back later to the children who report past life memories, and we'll touch on a few other areas as well. So before we got on the call, we were just talking about the medical community and how they view near-death experiences. And most people are probably aware that there's, stigma. There's kind of, it's viewed, it depends, I guess, professional to professional and maybe even hospital to hospital. But in general, it's viewed as, I guess, fantasy. It's viewed negatively. It's viewed like patients are just telling stories, which, as we said as well, will affect how difficult it is for the patients to integrate these experiences into their life and to be able to move forward. So just talk about that. Talk about what you're doing in that area, what the issues are with how the medical community view NDEs, and how can we tackle that issue and improve it?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. Thank you for asking me, and it's something that I am very interested in contributing to. So this interest developed as I got involved in this work and started communicating with people who've had a near-death experience and sort of learning more about their challenges and specifically how difficult it is sometimes to make sense of this experience and integrate it. And especially if someone had the experience in a medical setting and decided to share that with their physician or other medical professional and got a dismissive reaction, we know this could be very damaging. And sometimes it can basically shut people up for decades, and they feel afraid to talk about the experience. And we know this is very detrimental to this integration process. In terms of reactions that people may get, I mean, sometimes, of course, especially as we're learning more about these experiences, and it's become a lot more popular. There's a lot of information out there about NDEs. So there are physicians who are open to it, but still patients have reported very negative and dismissive reactions, like sometimes being told to shut up and not talk about the experience, being threatened to be committed to a psychiatric ward or being committed to a psychiatric ward and basically not let the person be discharged until they denied having the experience, or being told flat out that it's a hallucination or something meaningless. So there's a range of very dismissive reactions that can be detrimental. And something that I'm really interested in contributing to is to start raising research-based awareness of this phenomenon among the medical community, because there has been research, serious academic research into NDEs that's gone on for 40, 50 years.
Yeah.
And somehow that information and that body of knowledge, for the most part, doesn't seem to be integrated into medical practice, clinical practice, or medical education.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I think of it is, regardless of the physician's own beliefs about what these experiences are, what causes them, etc., the literature on the prevalence of the experiences and the fact they happen to people, as well as the fact that they can affect people very deeply, and the fact that people need to talk about these experiences and receiving bad reactions can be harmful.
Yeah.
Taking all of that, we have to start working towards being able to be supportive, or at least not be dismissive in a clinical setting, despite what the physician's own personal belief may be.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, it doesn't, at the very least, I mean, if you can't be supportive, at least do not cause harm by being dismissive.
Yeah.
So this is something that I think is going to be very important going forward. In terms of how we change that, I mean, I hope one day, I don't know how long it will take, but I hope one day there will be some formal training or education on near-death experiences in medical school, and it doesn't have to be super extensive, but at least some sort of exposure to this significant body of research needs to be communicated to medical professionals.
Is it not even like, are you aware of whether it's even touched on for like an hour in 7 years of med school, or is it just totally ignored?
I'm not aware of any formal training anywhere. However, can I tell you about a study that we're currently doing with physicians here at the University of Virginia?
Yeah, please.
Great. So, sort of the first step in that line of research in terms of how do we build that awareness among physicians is a study that we have here at the University of Virginia with physicians in any specialty, where we ask them about their attitudes towards near-death experiences, and also what barriers may stand in the way of them being able to acknowledge NDs and providing support to patients. So far, we've gotten responses from, I believe, 211 physicians. And we had a question in there, have you had any education or formal training on the topic? And 5 of these 211 participants said that they have had formal training, which was interesting because I thought, I'm not aware of, I am not aware of this education happening anywhere in med school. But something hopeful we found is that 55% of physicians, at least of physicians who responded, said that they're interested in either education on the topic or formal training, which we thought is, it's optimistic.
Yeah, it's at least a majority.
Yeah, and this number is in line with similar finding from, I believe, a paper almost 30 years ago in 1994. In that other, where they reported that half of the participants, the physician participants, were interested in learning more about NDs. That other paper, though, didn't look specifically at what the barriers are that are preventing physicians from providing support and acknowledgement. So that's another interesting feature of our study. I'm doing the study with Dr. Grayson, by the way, Dr. Bruce Grayson, who's one of the preeminent NDE researchers in the world. So we asked these physicians for 18 specific barriers. To what extent is this a reason that you cannot acknowledge an NDE or provide support if a patient discloses one? And we organize these into several different categories. The first category are barriers that have to do with lack of knowledge or lack of training. So for example, I haven't had training, or there's lack of scientific consensus about these experiences.
Yeah.
Then there were also barriers that were related to logistics, which is a huge thing with physicians. So for example, I don't have enough time is a big logistical barrier to almost anything involving physicians.
But of course, that doesn't stop you from being at least neutral, right? And at least saying, your experience might be real, and
and we also asked about ethical barriers. So, for example, the physician thinking that it's not their role to acknowledge it, or thinking that the experience is private. We also asked about barriers that relate to physicians' personal attitudes towards the experiences. So, for example, I'm not interested in NDEs, so I'm not going to talk about that. And then finally, we have what we call dismissing or pathologizing barriers, which are basically a collection of all these bad reactions that patients have reported hearing. So for example, the belief that the ND is a hallucination or a drug reaction, or it's not real, or that it's not meaningful, or that it's manifestation of mental illness, and so on and so forth. And so we ask physicians to rate each one of these barriers in terms of the extent to which it affects their clinical practice. And what we found here also gives us a lot of reason to be optimistic. So on average, the highest barriers that physicians endorsed were barriers related to knowledge. So they're saying we don't have enough. I don't have enough knowledge or not enough training. And then on the other hand, and perhaps surprisingly for us, the least endorsed barriers, almost close to zero, were these pathologizing barriers. So in other words,
just to jump in quickly, were they anonymous? The
survey, that's a great question. The survey was anonymous. However, to incentivize physicians to respond, we offered them the opportunity to enter a raffle for $100 Amazon gift cards, and that was optional. So many of them gave their email to participate in the raffle. At one point early on, I had looked at whether participating in the raffle or versus not actually affects these barriers, and I found that it doesn't. But it is a good question.
So you were saying a lot less of them, said the pathological reasons. That's why I was asking that, just because if it was, if they were putting their name, maybe they'd be ashamed to admit that they'd be that dismissive. But
that's a great question. I don't know if they would be ashamed if this is really how they
some maybe
feel
some
about it, but we do recognize that the sample is ultimately probably somewhat biased, in the sense that physicians who are so dismissive of the experience
they didn't fill the question
may be less likely to participate in the survey in the first place. And of course, we kind of packaged it in a way where we're not making any big claims about what NDs mean, just that these experiences happen, and patients sometimes talk about them with their physicians, and this research aims to improve these interactions, and we just want to hear your opinion, even if you haven't had a patient who's disclosed an NDE.
Yeah.
And we also found that having had prior education, as some of these physicians said that they have had prior education, like I mentioned, a few of them said they've also had formal training, that having had that prior knowledge is associated, as one might expect, with lower knowledge barriers. So it seems that training or education does make a difference.
Yeah. Although
from a scientific standpoint, this is, a correlational finding, and we would want to do a study where we create some sort of learning intervention, and then we test it in 2 different groups and see if that makes a difference. But still, for as kind of a beginning foray into this research, we're optimistic.
Yeah.
In terms of these findings.
Yeah, definitely. And where are you going to take it from here? Or in fact, before you answer that, in the questionnaire, I'm just wondering, like, was there a question? Probably not, but was there a question like, have they had a patient report an NDE to them?
Yeah, we had a question about that. 25% of our respondents said that they had a patient who has had an NDE. And then we also looked at, does having a patient who's reported an NDE, does it change the attitudes? And we also had a question about people self-rating their knowledge of NDE. So it's kind of subjective, because we asked participants to rate themselves versus giving them some sort of knowledge test.
Yeah.
And we found that participants, physicians who have had NDE patients also tended to rate their knowledge higher, which makes sense. And then the question is, did they have the knowledge and then they were able to recognize NDEs or pay more attention, or is it the other way around? Was it the encountering the patient that made them more likely to seek more knowledge? So this is something that we can't tell from this kind of study, but that finding was not surprising, and it was there nonetheless.
Yeah.
But I do want to say, we also, in addition to the survey questions, multiple choice questions, we also gave them the opportunity to provide feedback. And so kind of like an open-ended question. And some of them wrote very interesting things. And there were many, many of these physician respondents who were very supportive of either this research in general or the need for more education for themselves. And even this particular survey, many of them said that they're happy that this research is happening. That aside, we also got a lot of positive comments. I can't put a percentage on it, but it was multiple such comments where the physician said, it doesn't matter what I think about this experience. It matters that the patient feels like it happened, and that's what is important to acknowledge.
Yeah.
Or even comments like, I don't think we'll ever truly find out what causes NDEs, but it doesn't matter because patients experience that and it affects them, and that's important to acknowledge. So these comments also made us very hopeful.
Definitely. Yeah. Because again, at the end of the day, even if you think NDEs aren't like something indicative of anything beyond the brain, the after effects of NDEs are factual. They're proven. They happen. They are reality. Just a couple of quick questions again about that study. Was there anything in there, like, was there a question or a part for the physicians to tell you what they, like, their personal beliefs as to what NDEs represent? Like, for example, like a multiple choice, like, do you think NDEs do they fit with your religion, or are they just the brain, malfunctioning, or like just to get their kind of their thoughts. And then my second part of that question, which is different question, it's a different question.
Sure.
How what's the next steps? Are you going to be able to send a similar survey out to numerous hospitals across the states? What's the what comes next?
Well, these are great questions. Thank you for asking. So in terms of what physicians think about NDEs, we had a specific question in the survey where we asked, what do you think is the most likely explanation of NDEs? Mm-hmm. And we had three kind of categories of explanations and two additional answers. So I'll go over those. So the first category was a physiological explanation. So we didn't specify that, but that would include a brain-based explanation. The second category was psychological explanation or explanations. The third category was spiritual explanation. And we also had an option of don't know, or the last option was unknown or some other explanation. Okay. So what we found with the University of Virginia physicians is that 34% of them said ranked first the physiological explanation, and the second ranked explanation by University of Virginia physicians was the don't know, I don't know category, which was endorsed by I believe a quarter of participants. And so to give you a context to this, I want to tell you that we also have another arm of the study that's specifically for physicians, not at the University of Virginia, but physicians anywhere who have had a near-death experience. And we also asked them the same questions plus some questions about the ND they've had. So among the group of physicians who have had a near-death experience, more than 90% of them rank the spiritual explanation as number one. So this is a very interesting distinction between physicians who have had a near-death experience and this group of unselected physicians at this large medical center. So that was very interesting, and very among the University of Virginia physicians, very few physicians endorse the spiritual explanation as number one. Mm-hmm. Now, onto your second question about what we do going forward. So obviously, this is just one step in a research program that I'm hoping to build here and find some collaborators. So this study is actually still ongoing. It's being funded by the BL Foundation in Portugal. Mm-hmm. So in addition to the faculty attending physicians at the University of Virginia, we're also going to be recruiting residents and fellows who are technically still in training. So we want to see, do these attitudes that we see in the faculty physicians, are they a result of these many years of clinical experience, or do they tend to occur early on in one's training? And that's why we also wanted to add trainees to this sample. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, we did not get permission to also enroll medical students, which would have added to that data, and maybe in the future. So this is something that the study is still going on. Hopefully it will be wrapped up sometime next year. But we also at some point want to replicate this survey at in a different medical setting, in a different smaller hospital or somewhere else in a different part of the country. And when I presented this data earlier this month at the International Association for Near-Death Studies conference, I got an interesting question. Do you think these physicians are maybe more interested in NDEs because they know this research is going on at the University of Virginia? So maybe they're more open to it. And my personal gut feeling is that on average, it's probably not going to make much of a difference.
Yeah.
Because even though the research is happening here, many of these physicians or even other faculty members at the university, broadly speaking, don't necessarily know about us. We're a very small division within the Department of Psychiatry, or are not interested in these topics.
Yeah.
So my guess is that, that's not affecting the results much, but that's another reason that we would want to replicate that survey in a different setting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I believe, we'll do that when we wrap things up here and find the right collaborators. Also, beyond just the survey, there's many ways we can take this going forward. So like I mentioned, one study of interest would be to create a learning intervention or a course that we could give to a group of physicians or residents and compare outcomes on knowledge about NDEs compared to a control course or no intervention with a different group of physicians. So that would give us a better level of evidence in terms of showing that training does matter.
Yeah.
Going back to the survey, the logistical barriers were also rated somewhat high after the knowledge barriers, and that was mainly driven by the question about lack of time. So physicians saying, I don't have time, that's a big barrier as to why I can't acknowledge this or provide support. So going forward, it will be important to think about this limitation. We all know that physicians are very busy, extremely busy professionals. So we would need to find ways to educate them and to give them resources to provide acknowledgement within this limitation. So for example, maybe in the future, this is all probably a long way from now, but something we can work towards. Maybe if a patient discloses an NDE, maybe the physician or the medical professionals can share an information sheet about this experience and where to find support.
Yeah.
Back in the day when there was less popular awareness of NDEs, it was a huge deal for someone to even find out that this is a phenomenon that happens to people and then has a name.
Yeah.
And so we want to take the guesswork out of this process.
Yeah.
And something like, this is something that happens to people.
Seems like an ideal solution, having like a little leaflet that has some extra resources on the back. It has your website at DOPS. It has, the IANS website. It has multiple other things. And you're not alone and all this kind of thing.
It's a very long road, because talking with a physician, she made the point that in order for this to happen, it has to be recognized as a medical event with a specific code that needs to be entered into the patient's chart. So all of these are also logistical barriers in terms of making that happen long term. But just because it's difficult doesn't mean that we should not keep working towards that.
No, definitely not.
And when I presented this data recently, I also got feedback that you need to be presenting this at the annual conference of the American Medical Association. And I thought, that's a great idea. I don't know if they would accept this kind of proposal, but we need to start talking about that outside the confines of just people who are already interested in these experiences.
Yeah.
But I do think long term things will change. That's my sense. I just don't know how long it will take.
Yeah, I think it's happening already, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
in process. It's just, yeah, when is the tipping point going to arrive? Just on one of the things you said about the no time, the logistical reason for not. One thing I immediately thought of with that, and I'm sure that physicians, I'm sure they're incredibly busy and they don't have time. However, would they have time if they believed it to be a real phenomenon that was worthy, that required a little bit of support? Would it be the same? I just feel like probably some people, not everybody, I'm sure some of them are genuine, don't have time, and I wouldn't have time for anything. But I do think probably some of them put I don't have time because they dismiss the phenomenon. Do you see what I mean? That there's probably some overlap there.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I mean, I think if it's recognized as something very important, I think then maybe it will move up their priority list.
Definitely. And then all of a sudden, exactly, the time, you don't have time, but you would make time for something that was important. So it's just you deem this unimportant for your time. It's kind
right. And I'm guessing it also depends on the specialty, because if we're talking about a medical specialty where like emergency medicine, where every second, every minute may matter for saving someone's life, and this person is attending to many different patients. So for this kind of setting, yes, I totally understand. You may not have even a minute to address that. However, maybe in a different setting like family medicine, where physicians tend to spend more time with patients, then maybe if one were to think that an ND, if the patient discloses it, is important, then maybe that would move up there in that setting. Maybe it will become important to discuss.
Yeah.
So I think there's lots of different factors, and we probably cannot control all of them at the same time. But what I'm trying to do, and other people, is basically start changing this culture.
Definitely. Yeah.
The culture that this experience is meaningless, that it's pathological, and that it shouldn't be talked about.
Yeah. Absolutely. Which I guess leads me to a question from one of my patrons, Jeremy. He asks, are the similarities between near-death experiences enough to say that there is something here? As in, I guess that there is something non-physiological or not limited to physiology or psychology. Is there something, I guess, that would fit under the spiritual thing in the survey?
Well, one way I want to answer this question is there something to it? I think there is something to it, in the sense that we know now from extensive research and thousands of stories that people have shared that these experiences, although every experience is idiosyncratic, specific to the person and even time, like sometimes people can have multiple near-death experiences that are different, but they tend to have there's certain features that tend to come up over and over and over again. So this tells us there's some consistency there. And there's also consistency not only in the features of the experience, but how they change people. They also, obviously, there's variability between people, but on average, the way the experience changes people is very predictable. Like, people may become more focused on spiritual rather than material pursuits, more focused and interested in other people and helping other people. And also there's a very, very strong decrease in fear of death. That's probably the most prominent after effect, and also a belief in life after death. So the fact that we still see these very similar features across many different experiences tells us that this is a phenomenon that's been just that has been described reliably.
Yeah.
Does
And
that answer the question?
yeah, I think so. And to add on to what you said about the after effects, just to kind of there can be negative after effects as well, can't there? Like PTSD or something, but that is of course mostly rooted in the thing we've just been discussing this whole time, and that's the medical community's general view of this phenomenon. Like if it was open and accepted, and yeah, patients got support, they were asked even when they wake up after a surgery and they're brought a snack and a drink, did you have any experiences, would you like to talk with somebody, do you want to make any notes, do you want me to make some notes while you talk, just little things like that, and yeah, to give people the compassion and the time of day. But as you've said, I appreciate that you're trying to tackle this and yeah, taking it on head first, because there's a lot of hurdles in the way, but hopefully it's going to make a difference.
And I want to say, even if ideally the medical community becomes more supportive and more open to talk about these experiences, I don't think that would magically erase the difficulty that people can experience after they have this experience. But I think at least we want to not add an additional burden or an additional challenge.
Yeah. I think it would help in more ways. I think it would, like, the ripple effect, because I think if you educate the medical professionals, then that's going to filter into society and into the media, and it's going to change, the kind of general approach. Because I think people feel, everything adds to it, from like the media's approach, like how they're always coming out with a new article like, oh, doctors explain NDEs, like this time it's drugs in the brain, or this time it's lack of oxygen, and like, okay, no, we know it's not all of these things. But yeah, I think it would filter down, is what I'm saying, and I think it would have a bigger impact than maybe just the physicians. Before we move on and talk a little bit about children who report past life memories, is there any other things you want to say about these surveys, these studies, or about near-death experiences in general?
I want to say we're very grateful to experiencers who decide to participate in research. I know it's a very private experience that people do not always want to share, but I do want to recognize and express gratitude to the people who participate in our research. I think in the long run, it's making a difference. It's already made a difference, because if it were not for these willing participants, there would not be any NDE research. And for most of the ones who decide to participate in research are very, very generous with their time, and I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah. And I think we all thank you guys over at DOPS for what you do in furthering this conversation and everything, because it's so important. I sometimes think, or I was thinking earlier during our conversation, imagine if there was no division of perceptual studies, like, because already, even with the division of perceptual studies, these, as you were saying, a lot of the physicians in Virginia are not aware of what you do. So imagine the lack of awareness worldwide if we didn't have these one or two, important.
And yet we still have many who know about us and are interested. It's just not the majority, but I'm very grateful to be able to do this work. I think it's very important, and someone has to do it.
Yeah, definitely. It is. It's profound. So yeah, on to children who report past life memories. Again, we were talking beforehand, before we kind of went live here. You were saying that an interesting thing you've been doing over there with Jim Tucker, Dr. Jim Tucker, is you've been reconnecting or trying to reconnect with some children who you had their information on, as in the cases, in the records there at DOPS, and you've been reconnecting, and I don't know exactly what kind of questions you've been asking them or what kind of things you've been doing with them. So please, could you tell me more about this? Because it sounds fascinating.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So we have a study with children who were interviewed by our division about their past life memories. And well, the study is actually with adults who were interviewed and participated in research as children.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea behind it was to basically do a follow-up study to see what happens to these children as they develop and grow up. And in the past, there had only been two follow-up studies. One was from Sri Lanka and the other one was from Lebanon. That are, in both of these cultures, there is a cultural belief in reincarnation, which is not necessarily the case in the US.
Yeah.
So we thought it would be interesting to take this sample of kids who are in our database and reach out or try to find the ones that were 18 and above and reach out to them and try to see what happened to them. So we basically went into that database and identified anyone who was in the database who had been interviewed in person. So not just letter correspondence, but where an investigator from DOPS, usually Dr. Ian Stevenson and also Dr. Jim Tucker for some of the later or more recent cases.
Yeah.
So we identified this group of kids and then tried to find them online. So we took everyone who at the time was between the ages of 18 and 64 and used a lot of online databases to track these individuals using whatever data was available in our files, like dates of birth and names and former addresses, etc. And that was kind of a fun part of the project, doing a little bit of investigative work. And then we reached out to them via mail. So we sent 2 to 3 letters, and some of them we couldn't find, but most of them we could find. And we also reached out to parents of these children, using a similar approach. So in the end, our sample wasn't very big. I think we got about 23 out of maybe 89 adults that fit these criteria that we were able to find. Because the thing about this phenomenon is that, and that's been documented, unlike NDEs that tend to be remembered very vividly for many, many decades after the experience, the phenomenon of children who report past life memories tends to, the kid may be very involved in these memories when they're young, and just that it may be a big part of their experience. But then once they start growing older, and especially around school age, they tend to kind of move on from the phenomenon and then just many times just forget about this whole thing. So that was an interesting aspect that, most of these people probably don't even remember that they were ever interviewed, and we were trying to get them interested. It was a little bit difficult, but we still got some people who decided to participate in the study. Cool. And we initially gave them an online survey where we asked them, what do you remember of these memories? And then we asked a bunch of questions about what kind of impact, if any, the experience may have had on the person. And we went over different aspects. So we asked a question about your overall life and development, your relationships with family, your relationships with friends and peers, your school experience, etc. And then with some of them, we also did a phone interview where we asked them to elaborate on some of these answers. And we also gave them a separate personality questionnaire. We were also wondering, is there anything different about these people? So the first thing I want to say is that most of the people, not just the ones who responded, but even the ones that I found who didn't respond to our inquiry to participate in the research, they seem to be people of all walks of life, just kind of living normal lives, productive lives with jobs and families, etc. So that matches a finding from these other follow-up studies in the Middle East and Asia, where most of these kids, they just grow up and life goes on, you know?
Yeah.
It's like normal life.
Yeah.
Um, we did find in this sample that we asked them, we kind of combined the effect or impact of the memories from the different questions. And I think if I remember correctly, 45% of them said the memories had no impact whatsoever, or I don't even remember them.
Yeah.
And 55%, so it's about split about equally. 55% said the memories had some sort of impact. And it was interesting because the people who said it had an impact, we asked them, well, what kind of impact?
Mm-hmm.
Well, and sometimes it would say it had a positive impact. And we asked them to elaborate more. And then looking at their answers, we found certain themes that came up in multiple answers. So one of them is for the people who said they had been impacted by the memories, many of them said that it basically made them more open to just the totality of human experience, like realizing there may be more than what the human eye can see, and maybe reality is way bigger than we realize. So basically, some kind of openness to the spiritual, openness to seeing a bigger picture, which is very interesting. And another theme we saw is that some people said that it also gave them this confidence that when you die, it's not the end, that maybe you will see your deceased loved ones again in the future. And some of them mentioned that it was a very comforting belief to have going through life, that, you know, maybe death is not the end.
Yeah.
And like I mentioned, we also had another arm of that study with parents of children
Just
who had
before you
been,
go into
yeah.
the arm with parents, what was the responses in terms of the how much do you remember now? Do you still remember anything? Was it like, yeah, I'm
Oh,
guessing most of them didn't remember much at all, but yeah, how was that? What was that like?
I think it was about half. I think it was about half who said I don't remember anything, and the other one said I remember something. But we also asked them if you remember, if you still have memories, are they vivid memories
Mm-hmm.
or do they just seem to be like you
Flashes
remembering
or
what you said?
yeah,
And
yeah,
no one said, even of the people who still remembered something, no one said they still had vivid memories. But
interesting.
then we
Okay.
asked them, if you remember, what exactly do you remember? And one thing that it's not a central part of this study, but we're in the process of going back to these files to see, because we still have the files of all these individuals. So they're all paper files with the entire documentation of the investigation from the first communication with the parents, letters, transcripts, and actually audio cassettes of interviews that were done many decades ago and
Wow.
transcripts.
Yeah.
So we still have all of that, and we're going to go back to these files and just compare for the people who said they still remember something and gave us details. We want to compare, does that kind of match what was in the file?
Mm-hmm.
Although that is not necessarily a big part of the study, the main point was to see how are people impacted.
Yeah. Yeah.
And another interesting thing we found is um, we have this, Dr. Tucker developed this algorithm to assess the strength of a case. It's
Mm-hmm.
called the strength of case scale, where it gives a weighted rating to each case according to different variables or different factors in the case. So, for example, in addition to the statements, were there any birthmarks, any behaviors that seem to be related to this past life? What was the geographic distance between the child's life and the life that they're remembering? And a few other factors, but basically the higher the score, the stronger the case as we think of it. And we found that stronger cases are more likely to be remembered, which made sense.
Yeah.
It was an interesting finding.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's so interesting. Tell me a little bit about the other side of this then, the one where you contacted the parents.
Yeah, so we also contacted the parents. We got a higher number and maybe even a higher percentage of all the parents. So obviously some of the parents were deceased because they're much older than the adults we contacted. So we got more of them to participate, which is not surprising because they were more likely, they were adults at the time, and many of them reached out to us either because of concern for their child or some kind of intense curiosity or a combination of these. So they were more likely to remember dealing with the research investigation at the time, dealing with the memories and the repercussions for the child.
Yeah.
And we found that overall they tended to overestimate the effect of the memories, especially sort of in the negative direction compared to the sample of adults. Which,
in what way? What way do you mean the negative direction there?
Like, for example, when we asked them, one example I can give is when we asked what impact did the memories have on your child's school performance.
Okay. Yeah.
And several of them said, well, it had a negative impact because my kid because of these memories, they were more mature, they were wise beyond their years, and so they felt different than other kids, or they were bullied if they talked about these memories. But that necessarily was not something that came up when we asked the adults about that, who maybe even if that happened, they've long forgotten it. And of course, both samples I have to recognize are relatively small, but we're also working with a very small population that was eligible to even be in this study.
Yeah.
But overall, we found that parents tend to overestimate the impact. And many of the parents were personally affected in terms of the experience of having a child talk about past life memories changed or contributed to their own attitudes about life after death and reincarnation.
Yeah.
And we also asked them, that's probably not going to be something we report in the manuscript, but we also asked them, how did you feel about the experience of participating in this research? And all but one of them said it was a positive experience, and one parent said it was a neutral experience. And no one said it was negative, but I think if it was negative, they probably would not have participated in this research to begin with.
Yeah.
But many of the ones who said it was a positive experience said that at the time it was very validating for them to know that what is happening to their kid is something that someone is studying, that it's happening to other kids and other families. And some of them said it made me feel less crazy and less alone.
Yeah.
Because at the time, many, especially for the families that came from a very religious background, where whatever their religious beliefs were, if they contradicted this notion that, you could have memories from a past life, it could create a lot of tension with
like Bruce Leininger, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that was something that some of these families were also dealing with. And I think in at least some cases, this the participation in this research decades ago was done secretly, or the family members didn't know.
Yeah.
And I want to recognize that even today, there is still a lot of stigma when it comes to that.
Yeah, definitely.
One of these, I'm not going to give details, but one of these children as adults had a sort of an important societal position. I'm not going to say what it is, but someone in kind of like the public sphere. And this participant's mother also had, in a different arena, but also sort of a position of high public visibility. And the mother did respond to my letter, but expressed a lot of concern. She was curious about participating in the study, but she expressed a lot of concern about someone finding out that she or her child have ever been involved in this research.
Yeah.
And of course I reassured her, we could use a pseudonym. Our data is saved here on University of Virginia's servers. And even that, she was concerned about someone hacking into our servers. So it just reminded me that there is still, I'm in this world, so I deal with that stuff every day, right? So to us, it's no big deal. It is what we do. But in the real world out there, there is still a lot of stigma associated with this, and this concern that people will think you're crazy.
Stigma. Yeah, I'd say like NDEs, I would say the stigma with that is way, I mean, maybe I'm wrong and maybe it depends on, culture and everything, but I feel like from looking out at the world, I feel like the stigma around NDEs is so much less severe than the stigma around something like reincarnation or remembering a past life.
I think so, but even then we're just talking about both. I think there's still lots of stigma around both, but there's a lot more awareness that of NDEs now. I mean,
I think there's
documentaries, books, lots of books that have been written on the topic.
Yeah, that's true. I think one of the differences, sorry.
Yeah, and I hope, we may still be trying to understand what is going on with these phenomena, but we have to recognize they happen.
Yeah, definitely. I was going to say, I think the reason the stigma with NDEs, I feel like it might be less, is because NDEs, it feels a bit more open-ended. As with that survey, it's easier to put don't know, and there's less maybe attached to a don't know with an NDE. But if with the past life memories, like I feel like our options are more limited, especially if you're a materialist. You're not interested in psi phenomena or the possibilities of consciousness and things like that. And so I don't think there are really any normal explanations. In fact, maybe that's a good thing for you to answer is, do you think there are any normal explanations that could even get close to explaining the cases that you have at DOPS?
So that's a great question. And I also want to say for both NDs and children who talk about past life memories, because of the circumstances they occur in, there is, I guess it gives reasons to people to dismiss them. These are not necessarily valid reasons, in my opinion, when you examine the totality of the evidence. But for NDs, one might say, well, it happened when this person's brain was severely compromised or their body was severely compromised, so they can't, we can't trust what this person is saying. They just made it up, or it was a hallucination or a drug reaction. And of course, with children who talk about past life memories, the easy dismissal there is, it's just a child making up childhood fantasies. And again, I want to recognize that there is, at face value, there is good reason to think that. However, if you start delving into these phenomena deeper and looking at the evidence more deeply, especially for the compelling cases, it may be more difficult to dismiss them. So
Yeah.
you asked me, do I think there's a good normal explanation? And that's always as part of these investigation of little kids who talk about past life memories, when Dr. Tucker goes to interview them, and also when we're accumulating evidence in terms of what the child said, can we match that to the details of a deceased person, or if they've identified someone, do the details match? So that's always part of the process, this attempt to eliminate normal, what we call normal explanations,
Mm-hmm.
or other ways that the child may have learned the details of an adult life that they're talking about. And in some of the weaker cases, it may be debatable if that normal explanations has fully been invalidated or eliminated. However, there are cases that are compelling enough that it truly makes you wonder how it would even be possible for that child to have acquired this information.
Yeah.
So I think the strong cases provide some evidence that there's something else going on there beyond a normal explanation.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we still need to continue collecting data and hopefully find more of these compelling cases.
Yeah.
And with
Absolutely.
ND, so that's when it comes to children who report past life memories. When it comes to ND, um, I think there's many compelling cases that really, I mean, in my opinion, invalidate this notion that this is fully impossible or hallucination. And I'm thinking specifically of cases where the person who had the experience was able to perceive things
Mm.
happening either where the medical event was happening. So, for example, they were unconscious under deep anesthesia and able to perceive things happening in the operating room that were later verified, or
Yeah.
even things at a distance, sometimes in the waiting room of family members waiting while the surgery is happening.
Or a windowsill outside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's many of these veridical cases that would just be very hard to dismiss
Yeah.
again. And the reason some people want to dismiss them is to say, well, that's not even possible. You couldn't possibly have perceived that. Yet, if we're able to verify these details in at least some of these cases, we should consider, instead of saying this is impossible, the empirical imperative, in my opinion, would be to say, well, it looks like it's happening and we don't understand how it may be happening. So perhaps we need to extend or modify a little bit this confidence that we have that this is not possible,
Yeah.
and begin to kind of incorporate this into the models that we have about consciousness and perception and so on and so forth. If and in my opinion, this is a very important point here. We have to look at the data, and we have to be driven by the data.
Yeah. I was gonna, a minute ago when you were talking, that's what was in my head. Like, we need to follow the data. Exactly. Follow the evidence.
Yeah, and ideally, and I think one thing I've thought about that I think can get scientists and even lay people in trouble is when we start looking at start thinking of science as a bunch of findings versus thinking of science as a process, as a process of discovery, of testing hypotheses and seeing where the data takes us, as opposed to saying, well, this can't be happening. And my favorite one is when someone says this is unscientific. Like what does that even mean?
Yeah. I know, it's ridiculous. My favorite version of that is like the skeptic response, the diehard skeptic response of like, I don't even need to see the data. Don't need to look at it because it doesn't matter, because it can't happen.
I have a story about that, and it's from graduate school. So when I started my PhD, about a year later, there was kind of a big upset in the social psychology community because this paper, Daryl Bem's paper on precognition and retrocognition, and Daryl Bem is a very well-known psychologist who had a mainstream research career and some important findings. And then later in his career, he got into, or at least openly got into, the world of parapsychology and looking at these phenomena. And at one point, he actually was the chair of the psychology department at Cornell University. So we're talking about a very mainstream academic. So he published this paper in one of the best social psychology journals, which was it's a big deal for papers in our field to be published in a mainstream journal rather than one of these parapsychology journals that only a few people read.
Yeah.
So at the time that it came out in this journal, it was a big deal because it was in a mainstream journal. So mainstream psychologists were reading that. And so I was still taking classes as part of my PhD program at the time, and it came out in a few of these contexts. Mostly, they were making fun of, this is ridiculous. This is shameful or whatever. And one professor, who I'm not going to mention any names, but very well-known academic in his field, he said publicly, I will never read this because there is no way this could be possible. And that was it. And then I thought, this is the most unscientific thing,
anti-scientific,
you could say.
Yeah.
Literally. And I was frankly a little bit shocked. And maybe I was naive, but I thought, this is this super smart guy who is very well known in his subdiscipline of psychology. And he's saying that publicly. So that kind of, that was a good learning experience for me because it showed me how much dogma there is.
Yeah.
And definitely. As a matter of fact, when I finished my degree, they did this exit interview, and they asked me, what's the most important thing you learned during your doctoral studies? And I literally wrote, and I this is how I felt at the time. I don't know if anyone thought of it twice, but I said, I learned that there's lots of dogma in science and academia. And this was honestly my honest answer at the time.
Yeah. And I mean, there is, isn't it? It's crazy the amount of people, that have that kind of attitude and that think, we're the ones that are different. 2023, we're the ones that finally have figured it all out. All the scientists of the past that thought they figured it out, they were wrong. They didn't, but we have. We're the ones that will be right. It's just the hubris.
And it's an important point to have humility, because throughout the history of science, we know how many times scientists have been wrong.
Yeah.
And then we've found better tools to measure things.
Yeah. Yeah.
and then found that our previous understanding was not correct. And there's so many examples in the
So
history of
many.
science. So to me, it's a little bit shocking that now we think, okay, now we've got it all figured out. I honestly think we need more humility.
Definitely, definitely. That whole attitude is harder to process than these cases, that we've been discussing, and they're hard enough to process already.
Yeah, and I mean that's a whole conversation in itself. And not
Mm,
just humility, but
it
even
is.
just this just being comfortable with saying I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, or yeah, exactly, exactly. We don't that whole there's certain scientists that feel like they have to have an answer for everything, and it has to be an answer that stays within the bounds of the currently accepted paradigm. Yeah, it's wild. Um,
I
Marietta,
have
let me.
another story that's related, another study that's related to that, but we don't have to talk about that. We can talk about some of the other stuff.
Yeah, maybe next time if you're. I would love to, but yeah, unfortunately, I'll have to let you go soon. So the study where you spoke to physicians, not limited to Virginia, but just kind of nationwide, the ones that had an NDE, they said 90% of them saw it through a spiritual lens. So I was wondering about the kids that had the past life memories when they were younger, and that you followed up with as when they were adults, and the same for the parents. I'm wondering, did you ask them, if they had, due to their memories or for any other reason, if they had spiritual leanings, if they were religious, if the memories and experiences had affected their religions, or what their kind of view was on reality, I guess.
Yeah, we asked both the adults and the parents whether the memories had an impact on their life, belief in life after death and belief in reincarnation. And we think of these as separate because someone might be a religious person and think, uh, I'll continue life after I die in heaven, which is
Yeah,
somewhat different from believing in reincarnation.
yeah.
Um, I am not remembering the exact numbers, but we found that I think more than half, at least in each group, at least 60% felt that the memories had had an impact on their belief in reincarnation. And I believe it was stronger for the parents than for the kids.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
again,
I would
some
have
of
thought so.
these kids who are now adults felt like the memories had had no impact whatsoever.
Yeah,
And they said, I don't remember even participating in the study, but I'll participate in this study to help you out,
yeah, that's
sort of.
fascinating.
But it was not a universal belief in reincarnation.
And what about religion? Were there many parents or of the children that said, "Yeah, I'm religious and I still am religious," or did that come up?
We just asked them about their current religious or spiritual views, and we haven't really looked at that in depth. Most of them were some denomination of Christian, but
Mhm.
certainly not all of them. And
Yeah,
especially with the parents, there were a bunch who said they were spiritual but not religious.
yeah, yeah. I'm just interested because I know a lot of religions, at least in our kind of Western world, like Christianity, they don't really accept reincarnation. I know some individuals then can work it into their own personal beliefs, like Bruce Leininger, who I mentioned earlier, because he was Christian and hated the idea of the reincarnation, and eventually has managed to work it into his view of reality. But yeah, I know most religious people keep it very much at arm's length.
We
Um,
get we get emails sometimes from people of various religions who tell us, why are you even doing this work? Such and such book, such and such religious book has all the answers to these things.
yeah,
Or
yeah,
sometimes they'll tell us, why are you doing this? This is bad. It's from the devil. You should
yeah,
not be touching this.
yeah,
And we don't really interact with this kind of communication because we're not really in the business of validating any particular religious doctrine or belief system.
no,
We're trying to look at these phenomena kind of separately, even though, of course, it can interact with one's
hmm
spirituality, especially in the case of near-death experiences. We know that they can change people's spiritual beliefs, but we're still trying to examine this separately, and we're not necessarily here to confirm or deny specific beliefs. Of course, that research information and body of knowledge is out there, so people can make their own conclusions as it relates to their preferred belief system, if it's even of interest to them.
Yeah. But no, some people, I think, they're so into their religion that they don't see kind of the perspective that I have and that you probably have, that like, we don't know the answers, but we want to explore as much as we can and learn as much as we can about these phenomena. Whereas, obviously the religious way of looking at it is either, it's all in the Bible or the book. You don't need to look into any of it. It's all there. Or the other option is, as you say, like, the devil card.
Which,
and
we're and it's important for our own work to be rooted in empiricism versus we don't want someone. Well, I personally don't think it's desirable to have someone who comes here and says, well, reincarnation is real and I'm going to go about trying to prove it.
Yeah.
We're here to look for the evidence and look to see what is happening. What can we learn about these phenomena, and, bigger picture, what can we make of them? But it has to be rooted in what we're observing, primarily, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Let me ask you a question then, that kind of more for your gut feeling rather than your scientific observations, but still based on your observations. So do you think what we're seeing in at least some of these cases is actually reincarnation? Do you think that is probably what we're seeing in at least some of these cases? Again, not looking for your science. Nobody's going to hold you to this answer, and it's just your personal feelings on it. I asked Jim the same thing.
Yeah, I wonder what he said. I think so, but I have a stronger opinion when it comes to NDEs and what people are accessing there.
Yeah, okay.
With the memories, it's just really, I am confident with these memories that in at least some of the very strong cases, these kids appear to have memories of what was the life of another person. That I do believe is happening. Then whether or not that is reincarnation or the child just through some currently not well understood means has access to these memories, again, that would still be quote unquote paranormal or extraordinary.
Major glitch.
It's hard to tell, but then when we consider the evidence with the kids who have birthmarks that correspond to a fatal wound of the memory of the person's life that they seem to be remembering, I think that points more to the direction of, well, maybe there is some aspect of reincarnation here. That's my gut feeling combined with some of the empirical observations.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you. I think the data is very compelling. You were saying you have really strong feelings on the NDE.
Yeah, I think for near-death experiences, I think considering the totality of the evidence, and not just from NDEs, but also shared death experiences where the person by the bedside of a dying person also sometimes shares in that journey and that experience. That, to me, again, gut feeling combined with the empirical evidence suggests that this may really be what the dying process looks like. Somewhat phenomenologically. And it is, I mean, it's fascinating to consider, right?
Definitely. It is. And it's comforting in a lot of ways, even though, it's not like the skeptic would be like, aha, yeah, you admit it, it's comforting, and that's why you believe it, because it makes you feel better. No, it's not the case. We've been through the data, but it is still comforting to have, like, for me personally, since I started looking into all of these things, my fear of death has alleviated quite a lot, like I still
Yeah,
don't particularly want to die, but
it
yeah.
is comforting. And I would say, even if one believes that, I mean, that still does not, it does not fully eliminate the grief you have
No, of
when
course not. No.
you lose someone. It is comfort. Like, I lost my mom 4.5 years ago. And yes, I had this belief that she's in a better place. Certainly, she was relieved of her suffering. Um, and I had this belief that her consciousness would go on and then she's off to doing other things. And that was comforting, but it didn't, and it still is comforting, but it doesn't, it doesn't eliminate the human component of that person is not there.
Mm.
Maybe
Yeah.
to some degree it can moderate that, but we still have to deal with the physical repercussions of losing people. And
Yeah.
but it's an interesting point that someone will say, just believe this because it's comforting.
Yeah, I
Well,
know.
there's
That's
plenty of things that are comforting that are also true. So
yeah. Yeah, that's true. And there's plenty of things that would be comforting that I don't believe. I don't necessarily believe that a lot of this stuff is comforting. It's not the most comforting. If I could choose what would happen after I die and everything like that, I don't know if I would make it exactly like this. We don't know. There's some kind of reincarnation thing at play. There's some other realms seemingly going on. There's some apparitions, like things going on. We don't really know what happens. It would be much more comforting if I knew for a fact that I go to heaven, in the Christian heaven, like this place of eternal happiness and no suffering and everything like that. Whereas I think we can both pretty confidently say that death is not the end of our experience, but what that experience is going to be holds a lot of question marks still. So, yeah.
yeah, for sure.
If we can run through just a couple of quick questions, because
Sure.
I know we haven't got long, so I'm just going to try and get to as many as I can. So if you can kind of keep your answers as brief as you can, maybe just give me your brief thoughts, whatever pops into your mind. So this is one I would have liked to have spent more time on earlier, but now we're at the end. Let's just keep it really brief. So I was just wondering what you think we can take from and learn from the comparing near-death experiences and shared death experiences with intermission memories that sometimes come from cases of children who recollect past lives.
So, great question. I'll mention just one thing that has made an impression on me. So, in some of the cases in our database of children reporting past life memories, sometimes they will say, again, in human language, in child language, how they chose their parents.
Yeah.
And I've read a metaphor. There was one kid who said, I picked you out of a bag of mommies. It was like I picked a ball, like.
Wow.
And so the way that relates to NDEs is that NDers would sometimes or often say, like, I picked this life. I picked this life with these specific circumstances in which I was born, the specific family, the specific parents, to have specific preferences, proclivities, or challenges in my life to learn these specific
lessons or whatever,
lessons and to grow in specific ways. So this is something that there's evidence that's reported from both of these phenomena that at least people feel that there's some aspect of us choosing circumstances in life and parents before coming here for the sake of growing, for the sake of having specific experiences.
And I think we get similar kind of anecdotal information that goes along the same lines from mediumship, actually, which brings me to another very quick question. Unfortunately, we can't spend longer on it, maybe another time in the future. But yeah, just in brief, your thoughts on after-death communications.
So that's another interesting phenomenon. There's also research on that. And my thoughts are that this happens to a lot of people, and it is actually underreported because it's not necessarily something that people
even more stigma.
A lot. about with other people. It is, especially there's this element of, usually it happens when people are under intense grief in the early period after a loss, is when after death communications
Mm-hmm.
tend to be um, more common. So people don't necessarily talk about it because there's a high probability of dismissal.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I had a conversation with a colleague at that conference that I attended, and she told me she was very annoyed when she heard, like on the radio or media, those being referred to as grief hallucinations.
Mm.
But this is really how a lot of people look at them.
Yeah.
But those experiences happen, and more often than not, they're also comforting to people.
Mm. Yeah, definitely.
And there are after death communications where details have been reported that have been verified.
Yeah.
So this kind of example tells us, maybe it's not just something comforting that people make up to help themselves while they're grieving.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really fascinating area. Um, what do, oh no, what do I, sorry, I'm like kind of losing my mind there. I was going to ask you if you've ever had any of the kind of experiences that we've discussed today. So I don't know, ND or an out of body experience or even psi phenomena. Have you ever had any experiences of a precognitive dream or an after death communication, anything or anything related?
Yeah, so thank you for asking this question. So I have had experiences that some of them don't necessarily neatly fit into one of
Mm-hmm.
these categories, but
Yeah.
um, I have had a few experiences after, like I mentioned, my mom passed away, and I had at least two distinct experiences that I remember where I felt like it was a communication with her. And one, I'm not going to go into the details because we don't have time, and it's also very personal,
Personal.
but
Yeah.
um, there was some sort of, I guess you would call a communication through an LED unicorn light when the
Wow.
light was off.
Oh,
And
wow.
it was related to a specific area in my life that I felt very strongly about, was very emotional about, and I knew my mom cared about that. And it was a very interesting experience where this LED light that was off, there was an on and off switch, and when it was off, at times the horn of the unicorn would flash in a way that was different from how the unicorn flashed or lit up when it was on.
Yeah.
And my husband and I noticed that it was happening when I was particularly emotional or upset about this topic.
Mm-hmm.
And it did not care if my husband was in the room, but if I was not in the room, it would not do it.
Mm.
And so that was to me, that was extremely compelling. And at first my husband and I were just joking, oh, it's my mom saying hi. But then and that went on actually for a couple of weeks. And then when we were able to characterize the pattern of this um unicorn light activity when the switch was off, we became more and more kind of convinced that maybe it has, I mean, again, it's inexplicable, but we became convinced that it seemed like it had to do with my mom. And even my husband, who, he's a kind of a skeptic, even he thought, wow, that is really interesting.
Yeah.
So that was something, I guess, compelling for me in the realm of after death communications. But I've also had a lot of very interesting experiences that are related to my involvement of in this work. Stuff that went on for years on and off
Mm-hmm.
in a way that would either communicate that I need to be involved in this work or facilitate my involvement. And one of these I'll give just one example because it's a very long story that has many different elements, but
Another time, I guess.
yeah. And I've never shared the entire story publicly. I've shared it with some people, but it's not necessarily something like the whole thing is not something I talk about publicly because certain elements of it do, they do sound a little bit out there. Um, but this particular element I want to share is kind of when I was getting close to the end of my PhD and I was thinking, well, I've wanted to be involved in this work, and now is the time that I need to start thinking of how to do this. And I go to retreats at the Monroe Institute
Hmm.
here close to the University of Virginia. It's a great place that I really recommend to anyone who's interested in consciousness exploration.
Hmm.
So at the time, that was 2015, I decided that I could do just one program that year.
Yeah.
And I looked at the schedule earlier in the year, and I had this very strong gut feeling that I needed to go to this particular program, which was at the end of the summer. And at that point, because of my other experiences, I had learned that I need to trust this gut feeling when I have that. And I just kind of went along with it. And with time, that feeling that I had that I needed to be at this program became much stronger. The closer I got to the program, I told people I'm going to this program because I'm going to meet someone important on my life path, and I need to be there because there's some connection
Hmm.
that I need to make. And I wrote it in my diary, and I told the people that, I mean, I don't talk about, especially at the time when I was in grad school, I didn't necessarily talk about the Monroe Institute to everyone, but to the people who I talked to about these things, I said, I'm going there because I just have to be there and I'm going to meet someone important. So then fast forward to the program, I'm going there, meeting all the people, and the first day you meet everyone in the program, they were all great people. And I thought, even within a day or two, I had my money's worth. So I thought, I'm already having this great experience, but I've met everyone in the program and the instructors, and I don't have this feeling that I have met this person that I was supposed to meet. And I kind of started doubting it. And then one day the program ended. We were told we're going to have this visiting professor from the University of Virginia who's going to demonstrate some equipment. And he's one of my colleagues here, Ross Dunseith.
Yeah.
And then I knew, okay, this is the person that I'm supposed to meet. And then, long story short, I ended up having this conversation with him at dinner where I told him, I'm very interested in this work, and do you think you might have any openings? So to my great surprise, he said that, yeah, they're trying to expand and hire more new, younger people. And at that point, he just knew about my psychology work.
Hmm.
That's the field where I got my PhD in. And we were having a very nice conversation, and he was very excited about what I was telling him. And this is where the really transcendent part comes in, which to me it stands out as a very special experience I have. It doesn't fit into any of the categories or phenomena we talked about, but nonetheless, to me um, it was huge. And then as part of the conversation, he asked me, and do you know any statistics? And this is my entire prior background.
Yeah.
So in that moment, the experience I had was sort of like be like basically stepping out of time, and it felt like time literally stopped, and I was able to perceive and again, it's very hard to put this in
Yeah.
words, right?
Yeah.
It's something that transcends human language.
Yeah.
But I was able to understand in that transcendent state how all of these experiences in my life, even if they seem like divergent paths and doing a lot of different things, had been leading, like there was always going to be this path that was always going to lead to this particular moment, to this particular encounter.
Wow.
And I understood, again, not
A knowing.
exactly. I knew and I understood that there was, in that moment, that there was no one else who could be in my shoes having this conversation.
Yeah.
And so, and I've had a few other very similar experiences, all related to this work that I do.
Wow.
And then after this encounter, I mean, 3 days later, I was back to Philadelphia, back to normal life. And I was in touch with Ed Kelly here,
Yeah, love it.
just talking about how I can get involved. And that's how I made this connection with this place. And that's been something in my life where just reliably there have been a lot of experiences like that.
Yeah.
And over time, I've just learned to just go with it.
Yeah. That's awesome. I guess we could call them spiritually transformative experiences in a way. Like they're maybe not the
Yeah.
typical kind of thing you think of when you hear that, but yeah, it sounds like you connected to something, you tapped into some kind of thing that's, that maybe this universal consciousness or whatever.
Yeah,
But yeah,
something led me to be there,
yeah.
so I could make this connection. And at the time when I signed up for the program, I didn't know that Ross is the colleague I met there. I didn't know he was part of that program every time I offered it.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking me.
Yeah, no problem. I think I'm going to have to let you get going. I did have a couple of extra questions that I was hoping, but maybe what I can do, if it's okay with you.
Yeah, what are your questions? Let's see if we can answer them real quick.
Okay, well, let's see. So the first one is from somebody called Gloria. She said, what personality correlates have been found with those who experience psi phenomena?
That's a great question. And the literature kind of looks at both psi performance in the lab, so on psi tasks, and also spontaneously reported experiences. So two things I can think of, well, actually more than two things, but if we think of the big five personality traits, so extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, neuroticism, and openness to experience. Extroversion and openness to experience in some studies are shown to correlate with both higher frequency of spontaneous experiences and also lab psi performance. In addition to that, there's a cluster of personality traits that kind of tend to go together, including fantasy proneness, which is the kind of the proclivity to get involved in fantasy. There's also absorption, which is the proclivity to get involved in one's mental imagery. And it's similar to fantasy proneness. And also dissociation, which when we hear dissociation, sometimes we think of it as a pathological thing, but there's a range of dissociative experiences that are not necessarily pathological. So all three of these, and they tend to kind of correlate with each other. All three of these have been shown in some studies to also correlate with psi experiences.
Cool. Interesting. Wow. And I know you're trying to answer these as quick as you can, and I appreciate that because I know you probably have more to say, but I appreciate that you're trying to keep it quick. This one's from Chris. Dr. Pehlivanova, does your research show any correlation between people practicing meditation and the experience of psi phenomena?
So I personally haven't done research on that, but I have a colleague, Dr. Kim Pemberthy, that I believe you've also interviewed. So she's done a study on that where it shows that that yes, meditators do tend to experience a higher rate of these experiences. And honestly, this is how I mentioned I myself have had a lot of sort of transcendental experiences, especially as related to my getting involved in this work. And I will say for me, all of that started very shortly after I started meditating years ago. I started practicing transcendental meditation.
Cool.
And within a few weeks of that, a lot of interesting things started happening, especially as related to intuition. And so I personally have experienced that to some extent.
Wow. Yeah,
Thank you for the question.
And that's one that keeps coming up. Every area I look into in these spheres, there's always some kind of thing with meditation makes these things happen more often or makes people more connected to whatever it is. And it's really fascinating. I think there's so much left to...
A lot of it is basically kind of accessing these altered states of consciousness.
Yeah.
Meditation can put you there, especially certain kinds of meditation. Psychedelics can help you access that state.
Yeah.
The audio technology used at the Monroe Institute, HemiSync, and a few other ones that they've developed recently that can also help you access these states. And I think these are all different tools that can help you get there.
Yeah, definitely.
And I know it's fascinating to a lot of people, to myself included, to be able to access these experiences.
Yeah, it is fascinating. And again, there's so much more I could say about that, but again, we'll have to save it for another day. Last question is from Jeremy again. Does she think that there is another layer of reality that we will one day quantify and have access to through technological or psi-based means? And what is the best evidence for this other layer of reality? And I guess I can kind of give you a head start on that one in that I think we've already established that we do think there is another layer of reality in some sense, although, that there's lots of ways you could interpret that, the phrasing of that. But I think when we talk about the NDEs and stuff, I think you think there is probably another layer of reality in some sense. So I guess the question would be, do you think that we'll one day quantify that and have access to that either through technological means, let's say, for now?
I don't know, but I think I answered part of that in my previous answer when I said we do have all these tools that allow us to connect to this bigger reality.
Definitely.
I think to the extent that we continue to hone and improve these tools, and to the extent that we continue to make them available to more people and raise awareness and interest in these phenomena, I think overall that would, on a societal level, that would increase our ability to get connected to this other layer of reality. Now, I don't know if the person had in mind something related to AI, which is now a big topic of conversation in any arena of science and with potential social implications. I don't know about that, but I think on a very subtle level, the tools already exist. We just need to improve those tools. We need to use them, and we need to make them more widely available. So this would be my answer to this question.
Yeah, great. And Gary Schwartz is working on his soul phone. I don't know what the updates are with that, but I think there were some updates recently. Last thing I'll ask you, Marieta, before I let you finally get going, is just if there are any books that you'd like to recommend people read. That could be about any of these topics. Just if you don't have to recommend any, it's just if one or two pop into your mind when I say that, that would be great.
Yeah, I think I'll recommend Dr. Bruce Grayson's book, After.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, if people are specifically interested in ND encounters in a medical setting, I recommend the book by Dr. Lauren Belg. I think it's called Near Death in the ICU. And
Okay.
she presents basically an account of her own, of how she developed interest in open-mindedness and NDs and related phenomena that patients are sharing. And I think this book offers a very nice account of an open-minded, interested physician, and also the barriers that she faced and how much the field has changed. And Dr. Grayson's book is all about his long and very distinguished career in ND research, and a little bit of his own story of where he started and where he ended up. So I also recommend that as well.
Yeah.
For
Perfect.
anyone who's interested in NDs.
Yeah, great recommendations. Thank you. And just if you have any last words for anybody that has watched or listened to this today.
I just want to say thank you for your attention, and I'm glad people are interested in this topic. Thank you for reaching out, and I had a lot of fun talking to you. Yes, we could have talked a lot longer. There was a lot more ground to cover, but I think we covered some important topics. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Marieta. I've really enjoyed it as well. And as you say, we've covered some really interesting stuff that I haven't really discussed on this show in from these angles before. So it's been really enlightening, and yeah, I've enjoyed it. And hopefully we'll get to do it again sometime next year or something like that.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you to Marieta Pehlivanova for talking with me. Thank you to our patrons for supporting us, and thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the interview and gained some new insights. Please see the description for relevant links and more. If you want to continue unraveling the universe with us, please subscribe. And if you want to give us even more support, please consider a small monthly contribution via Patreon. Thank you.